Adam's hands froze on the currycomb as muffled sobs echoed from the abandoned stall at the far end of Cornelius Whitmore's stable. The autumn wind of 1887 rattled the wooden boards. But those weren't the sounds of whether someone was crying. Behind that rusted lock that hadn't been opened in months, he dropped the brush and crept toward the sound. His worn boots, silent on the hay-strewn floor. The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by panicked shuffling. Adam pressed his ear to the warped wood and whispered, "Hello? Someone in there?" A sharp intake of breath, then silence. "I'm Adam," he continued softly. "I work the horses here. Are you hurt?"
Ouch.
After a long pause, a trembling voice answered, "Please, don't tell anyone you heard me." The voice belonged to a young woman, refined despite her obvious distress. Adam's heart hammered against his ribs. "What's your name?" "How long have you been locked in there?" "Sophie," came the whispered reply. "Sophie Hartwell. And I don't know anymore." Days blur together when you can't see the sun. Adam's blood ran cold. He knew that name Sophie Hartwell, the missing daughter of Judge Hartwell, whose disappearance 3 weeks ago had set the entire territory buzzing with search parties and reward posters. The judge claimed she'd eloped with some drifter, but Adam had seen the man's cold eyes when he'd spoken those words to the sheriff. "Sophie Hartwell? Everyone thinks you ran away." A bitter laugh escaped through the boards. "My father wants everyone to think that, but I discovered something I shouldn't have. About his dealings with the railroad company, about the families he's been forcing off their land." Adam's mind raced. Judge Hartwell owned this stable, along with half the businesses in Millbrook Valley. If Sophie was his prisoner here, under Adam's own nose. "The lock," Adam said urgently, examining the heavy iron padlock. "Do you know where the key is?" "Cornelius has it. He brings me food once a day and empties the bucket." Sophie's voice cracked with shame. "Adam, if he finds out, I'm here." "He won't," Adam said firmly, though his hands shook as he spoke. "I'll figure something out. Can you hold on a little longer?" "I don't have a choice," Sophie replied. And something in her tone a thread of steel beneath the fear made Adam's chest tighten with unexpected admiration. As footsteps crunched on the gravel outside, Adam quickly returned to grooming the chestnut mare, his mind spinning with plans. Cornelius Whitmore entered with his usual swagger, gold watch chain glinting against his vest. "Evening, boy. Horses bedded down proper?" "Yes, sir," Adam replied. Not trusting himself to meet the man's eyes, Cornelius's gaze swept the stable, lingering on the locked stall. "Good. Remember what I told you about staying in your own business, Adam? Some doors are locked for good reasons." After Cornelius left, Adam waited until his footsteps faded completely before approaching Sophie's prison again. "I'm going to get you out," he promised through the wood. "It's too dangerous," Sophie protested. "If they catch you, then I'll—" "Risk it," Adam interrupted. "No one deserves to be caged like an animal, especially not for trying to do what's right." Dawn had barely crept through the stable windows when Adam arrived early, a leather satchel hidden beneath loose hay in an empty stall. He'd spent the sleepless night plotting, now carried the tools he'd need, his father's old lockpicks, wrapped in cloth to muffle any sound. "Sophie," he whispered urgently, "I'm going to try something." Her voice came weaker than yesterday. "Adam, I don't think I can walk very far. They haven't been feeding me much." Rage burned in Adam's chest, but he kept his voice gentle. "Then I'll carry you if I have to. We just need to wait for the right moment." He knelt by the lock, inserting the thin metal picks his father had taught him to use years ago, back when they'd been too poor to afford a locksmith. The mechanism was old, but well-maintained. It would take time and patience as he worked. Sophie began to speak, her voice growing stronger with each word. "My father's been taking bribes from the Continental Railroad. They want to build a line. Straight through Widow McKenna's farm, through the Brennan homestead, through all the small properties on the east side of the valley." Adam paused in his picking. "Those families have been here for decades. The railroad's offering good money for the land, but the families won't sell. So my father's been finding legal reasons to foreclose on their mortgages, declaring their claims invalid. Anything to force them out. I saw the papers, Adam, the bribes, the falsified documents. When I confronted him, the lock clicked softly but held firm. Adam tried a different angle with the pick. Had Cornelius locked me away while he figures out what to do with me? I think they're waiting for people to stop looking. Then they'll say I died in an accident somewhere far from here. That's not going to happen, Adam said fiercely. The lock gave another small click. He was getting closer. Jasper works the night shift at the telegraph office. If we can get you to him, he can send word to the territorial marshal in Colorado Springs. Someone outside your father's influence. But Cornelius will check on me soon. He always comes with breakfast when the church bells ring 7. Adam glanced toward the stable doors where pale morning light was strengthening. Then we leave before. Then, can you ride? I grew up on horseback, Sophie said. He heard a ghost of her former spirit in those words. The lock suddenly gave way with a soft snick that seemed to echo like thunder in the quiet stable. Adam's hands trembled as he lifted the heavy padlock free and slowly pulled open the stall door. Sophie Hartwell sat huddled in the corner. Her once fine blue dress torn and dirty, her dark hair tangled around a face too pale and thin. Green eyes burned with fierce determination as they met his. "Hello, Adam," she said softly. He'd imagined this moment all night. But seeing her reality, seeing the evidence of her imprisonment, struck him speechless. She was beautiful even in her terrible circumstances, but more than that, she radiated a strength that made his heart race. "Hello, Sophie," he managed. "Ready to get out of here?" She tried to stand but swayed dangerously. Adam caught her arm, steadying her, and felt the tremor of weakness in her frame. "The black gelding," he said decisively. "Thunder. He's strong enough to carry us both and fast enough to outrun any pursuit." "Us both?" Sophie looked up at him with surprise. "You don't think I'm letting you face this alone, do you?" For the first time since he'd heard her crying, Sophie smiled. Thunder's hooves drummed against the hard-packed earth as Adam urged the powerful gelding through the pre-dawn darkness. Sophie's arms wrapped tight around his waist, her body pressed against his back as they raced toward the edge of town. Behind them, Millbrook Valley still slept, unaware that its most wanted fugitive was finally free. "The telegraph office is just ahead," Adam called over his shoulder, feeling Sophie's grip tighten as they navigated a sharp turn in the trail. But as they crested the hill overlooking Main Street, Adam's heart sank. 3 riders waited in the shadows near the telegraph office, and even in the dim light, he recognized Cornelius Whitmore's distinctive silver-banded hat. "They're watching it," Sophie said, her voice tight with disappointment. "My father must have anticipated we'd try to send word out." Adam pulled Thunder to a halt behind a stand of cottonwood trees, his mind racing. "Then we'll have to ride too. Colorado Springs ourselves. It's a hard day's journey," but the thunder of approaching hooves cut him off. A search party was coming up the main road, lanterns bobbing in the darkness like angry fireflies. "This way," Adam whispered, guiding Thunder deeper into the trees. But Sophie caught his arm. "Adam, stop. They'll chase us all the way to Colorado, and Thunder can't outrun them forever, not carrying 2 riders." Her green eyes met his in the starlight. "Nice. There's another way." "What do you mean?" Sophie's jaw set with determination. "The evidence is still in my father's study. The railroad contracts, the bribe receipts, all of it. If we can get those papers." "That's suicide," Adam protested. "Your father's house will be crawling with men looking for you." "Not the house," Sophie said quietly. "The judge's private office behind the courthouse. Keeps the most sensitive documents there in his personal safe. And I know the combination." Adam stared at her. "You want a break? Into the courthouse?" "I want to expose the truth," Sophie replied. "It's the only way this ends without us running forever." The search party was getting closer, their voices carrying on the wind. Adam could hear Cornelius shouting orders, organizing them to split up and cover more ground. "The courthouse has a back entrance," Sophie continued urgently. "If we can get there while everyone's out searching, and then what? Even if we get the papers, who's going to believe us against a judge?" Sophie's smile was grim but determined. "Pastor Henley. He's been suspicious of my father's sudden wealth, and he has connections with the territorial governor. We can get the evidence to him. Lantern beams swept through the trees dangerously close to their hiding spot. Adam made his decision. "Hold tight," he whispered, and spurred thunder deeper into the forest. They took a winding route through the hills, avoiding the main roads as the search parties fanned out across the valley. Sophie proved to be an excellent guide, directing him along forgotten logging trails and creek beds that would hide their tracks as they approached the courthouse from behind. The building loomed dark and imposing against the night sky. Only one window showed light, the sheriff's office, where undoubtedly men were coordinating the search. "The judge's office is on the second floor," Sophie whispered as they dismounted in the shadows of the building. "There's a back staircase that leads directly to it." Adam tested the door handle, locked as expected. But these old buildings had their weaknesses, and years of odd jobs around town had taught him which windows latched properly and which didn't. "There," he said, pointing to a second-story window where the frame had warped with age. "Can you climb?" Sophie looked up at the wall, then at her torn dress. Without hesitation, she began tearing the fabric shorter, fashioning it into something she could move in. "I spent half my childhood climbing out of my bedroom window," she said with a ghost of her old spirit. "Race you to the top." As they began their careful ascent up the wooden trellis, Adam couldn't help but marvel at this woman, who'd survived weeks of imprisonment only to risk everything for justice. Sophie Hartwell wasn't just beautiful, she was brave in a way that made his chest tight with admiration and something deeper he didn't dare name. The window gave way under pressure, and they slipped into the dark courthouse corridor like ghosts. Sophie's hand shook only slightly as she worked the combination. On her father's safe, the metal tumblers clicking softly in the darkness of Judge Hartwell's private office. Adam stood watch by the window, tracking the lanterns of the search parties as they combed the hills outside town. "Got it," Sophie breathed as the safe door swung open. Inside, manila folders bulged with documents. Sophie pulled them out with practiced efficiency, clearly familiar with her father's filing system. "Here the Continental Railroad correspondence, and this... Her voice hardened. "The forged mortgage documents." Adam moved to her side, peering over her shoulder at the papers in the moonlight streaming through the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. Judge Hartwell hadn't just been taking bribes, he'd been systematically destroying families for money. "Look at this," Sophie whispered, holding up a letter with the railroad's official letterhead. "For each property successfully transferred to Continental Railroad ownership, Judge Hartwell will receive $500 plus a bonus of 2% of the assessed land value." "Adam? He's made thousands off of ruining people's lives." "And here's the list of targeted properties," Adam said grimly, reading over her shoulder. "The McKenna farm, the Brennan homestead. Sweet Mary, even old Mrs. Kowalski's boarding house is on here." Sophie gathered the papers with trembling fingers. "We have enough here to put him in federal prison for corruption, fraud, conspiracy." Footsteps echoed in the courthouse hallway. Below, Adam and Sophie froze, listening as boots climbed the stairs with purposeful intent. "Someone's coming," Adam whispered. Sophie stuffed the documents into a leather portfolio she'd found in the safe. But they could hear voices now, Cornelius Whitmore and another man Adam didn't recognize. "Check the judge's office first," Cornelius was saying. "If she's fool enough to come back here... The window," Adam said urgently, but Sophie shook her head. "Too late. They'll see us climbing down." She looked around desperately, then grabbed Adam's hand. "The adjoining room, Judge. Morrison's old chambers. The door connects through here." They slipped through the connecting door just as the main office door opened. Through the thin wall, they could hear Cornelius moving around, checking the safe. "Damn it all to hell," Cornelius snarled. "The safe's been opened." "You sure the judge?" "Didn't the other man begin?" "Judge Hartwell's in Denver until Thursday," Cornelius snapped. "No, someone's been here. I've got a pretty good idea who." Sophie pressed close to Adam in the darkness of the adjoining room, the stolen documents clutched against her chest. He could feel her heart racing, matching the rapid beat of his own. "We need to get these papers to Pastor Henley," Sophie whispered. Directly into his ear, her breath warm against his neck. "Before they realize what we've taken, you're going to be watching every exit," Adam replied softly. and every person in town who might help us. Through the wall, they heard Cornelius giving orders to his companion. Get word to the judge in Denver. Tell him his daughter has the papers. And double the reward for bringing her back live. Mind you, the judge wants to handle this himself. What about the stableboy? Cornelius's laugh was ugly. Fool thinks he's playing hero. When we catch them, he'll have an unfortunate accident. Judge's orders. Sophie's hand tightened on Adam's arm, and he saw fear in her eyes. Not for herself, but for him. I won't let anything happen to you, she whispered fiercely. Adam, I'm sorry I got you into this. I got myself into this, he replied, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. And I'd do it again. In that moment, crouched in the darkness with danger closing in around them, Adam realized something that should have terrified him, but instead filled him with fierce determination. He was falling in love with Sophie Hartwell, his brave, principled woman who'd risked everything to fight corruption and who now worried about his safety over her own. Sophie, he began, but she pressed her fingers to his lips. They're moving, she whispered. The footsteps were retreating down the hall. Adam waited until he was certain they were gone, then carefully opened the connecting door. The judge's office was empty, but they'd left the safe open in their haste. Now's our chance, Adam said, but we can't go back the way we came. They'll have men watching the building. Sophie moved to the window and looked down at the street below. The roof, she said suddenly. You can get to the church bell tower from here and from there. To Pastor Henley's house, Adam finished, understanding her plan. As they prepared to climb out onto the courthouse roof, Sophie turned to him with an expression that made his breath catch. Adam, she said quietly, if we don't make it through. We will, he said firmly. But if we don't, she continued, I want you to know that meeting you. It's the first time I've felt hope in weeks. Before he could respond, she was already climbing through the window onto the steep slate roof. The precious documents secured against her body, ready to risk everything one more time for justice. The church bell tower rose like a beacon in the pre-dawn darkness as Adam and Sophie made their treacherous way across the courthouse roof. Below them, search parties moved through the streets with military precision. But up here among the chimneys and gutters, they were invisible ghosts seeking justice. There, Sophie whispered, pointing to where the bell tower's stone foundation came within jumping distance of the courthouse's western wall. It's possible, but ... double quotes. Adam measured the gap with his eyes. 8 feet, maybe 10? It's possible for him, but Sophie was still weak from her imprisonment, and one misstep would mean a fatal fall to the cobblestones below. I'll go first, he said. Then, catch you when you jump. Adam, if I don't make it, you will, he said fiercely. We've come too far to fail now. He backed up, took a running start, and leaped across the void. His boots hit the stone ledge of the bell tower hard, and for a terrifying moment he teetered on the edge before catching his balance. Your turn, he called softly, extending his arms. Sophie clutched the document portfolio against her chest and stepped back for her own running start. In the moonlight, she looked like an avenging angel in her torn dress, her dark hair streaming behind her as she ran toward the edge. She jumped with desperate courage, and Adam's heart stopped as she seemed to hang suspended in the air for an eternal moment. Then his arms closed around her, pulling her safely against the tower wall. I've got you, he whispered into her hair, and neither of them moved for a long moment. Holding each other in the shadows, high above the town, the pastor's house is just across the square, Sophie said finally, her voice slightly breathless. But they'll be watching it. Adam looked down at the search parties below, noting their patterns. Not all of it. It's a blind spot near the cemetery gate where the old oak trees block the sight lines. They climbed down the inside of the bell tower, the thick stone walls muffling their movements. At the bottom, Adam carefully opened the door that led into the church proper. The sanctuary was dark and peaceful, moonlight filtering through the stained glass windows to paint colored patterns on the floor. This way, Sophie whispered, leading him toward the side door that opened onto the cemetery as they slipped between the weathered headstones, using the monuments as cover. Adam couldn't help but notice how Sophie moved graceful despite her exhaustion, determined despite the obvious danger. Every step brought them closer to safety, but also closer to the moment when this adventure would end and they'd have to face what came next. Pastor Henley's house sat on the far side of the cemetery, a modest wooden structure with a small garden. Light flickered in one window. The pastor was awake, probably praying for the safe return of the judge's missing daughter. "Wait here," Adam said as they reached the garden fence. "Let me make sure it's safe." But Sophie caught his arm. "Adam, after tonight, what happens to us?" The question hung between them in the darkness. Adam had been wondering the same thing, but hearing her voice, it made his chest tighten with uncertainty. "I don't know," he admitted. "You're Judge Hartwell's daughter. I'm just a stable boy." "You're not just anything," Sophie said fiercely. "You risked your life for a stranger. You helped me fight for justice when everyone else was too afraid. Makes you more of a man than any of those so-called gentlemen who tip their hats to me at church socials." Before Adam could respond, the back door of the pastor's house opened, and Reverend Henley himself stepped onto the porch as if drawn by some instinct. "Sophie," he called softly into the darkness. "Child, is that you?" They emerged from their hiding spot among the roses, and the elderly pastor's face showed relief and concern in equal measure. "Dear Lord, we've been so worried," he said, hurrying down to embrace Sophie. "Your father said you'd eloped, but I never believed." "Sophie, child, what happened to you?" "Pastor Henley," Sophie said urgently, "I need you to send an immediate telegram to the territorial governor. My father is taking bribes from the Continental Railroad to force families off their land illegally." She held out the stolen documents, and Pastor Henley's expression grew grave as he scanned the papers in the light from his doorway. "These are serious accusations, Sophie." "They're not accusations," she replied. "They're proof, and there are men searching for me right now who'll kill Adam and lock me away forever to keep this quiet." Pastor Henley looked at Adam with new respect. "You helped her get these?" "We helped each other," Adam replied. The pastor nodded slowly. "Come inside, both of you. We have work to do before sunrise." As they hurried toward the house, Sophie slipped her hand into Adam's. Her fingers were cold but steady, and the simple touch sent warmth racing through his entire body. "Whatever happens next," she whispered, "I'm glad we're facing it together." Dawn was breaking over Millbrook Valley when Pastor Henley finished encoding the telegram to Territorial Governor Crawford. The damning evidence against Judge Hartwell lay spread across his kitchen table like a hand of cards that would topple a corrupt empire. "The governor will have federal marshals here within 2 days," Pastor Henley said, sealing the documents in an oilcloth packet. "But until then, we need to stay alive," Adam finished grimly. Through the pastor's front window, they could see search parties converging on the town square. Word must have spread that Sophie had been spotted near the courthouse. There was a root cellar beneath. "My pantry," Pastor Henley said. "You can hide there until the front door exploded inward," and Cornelius Whitmore strode in with 4 armed men behind him. His eyes swept the room and settled on Sophie with cold satisfaction. "Miss Hartwell," he said with mock courtesy, "your father is very eager to see you." Sophie stood up slowly, placing herself between the gunman and Adam. "I'm sure he is, especially after he discovers what's missing from his safe." Cornelius's smile faltered. "Where are the papers, girl?" "Gone," Sophie replied calmly, "along with copies of every corrupt deal, every bribe, every family you've destroyed for money. You're bluffing." Pastor Henley stepped forward with quiet authority. "I'm afraid she's not, Mr. Whitmore. The evidence is already in the hands of federal authorities." One of Cornelius's men shifted nervously. "Boss, if the federals are involved, ... "Shut up," Cornelius snarled. Then, to Sophie, "It doesn't matter. Dead girls can't testify." Adam moved faster than he'd ever moved in his life, lunging for the poker beside the fireplace as Cornelius drew his gun. The iron rod connected with the man's wrist, sending the pistol spinning across the floor. "Run!" Adam shouted to Sophie, grappling with Cornelius as the other men rushed forward. But Sophie didn't run. Instead, she snatched up the fallen pistol and backed toward the window, her green eyes blazing with determination. "Nobody moves," she said in a voice that brooked no argument. "Pastor, get behind me." The room froze in a deadly tableau. "Adam, had Cornelius in a headlock. The other gunmen had their weapons drawn but couldn't fire without hitting their leader. Sophie held them all at bay with steady hands and fierce courage. "You can't hold us forever," one of the men said. "I don't have to," Sophie replied, "just until the sheriff arrives." "The sheriff works for your father," Cornelius gasped from Adam's grip. "Sheriff Martinez works for justice," came a new voice. From the doorway, everyone turned to see Sheriff Carlos Martinez himself, badge gleaming on his vest and rifle in his hands. Behind him stood 3 federal marshals in long coats, their presence transforming the standoff immediately. "Cornelius Whitmore," the lead marshal announced. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder." As the federal officers took control of the situation, Adam finally released Cornelius and moved to Sophie's side. She lowered the pistol with shaking hands, and he caught her as her knees gave out from exhaustion and relief. "It's over," he whispered, into her hair. "Marshal Thompson received Pastor Henley's telegram an hour ago," Sheriff Martinez explained. "We've been riding all night. Judge Hartwell was arrested in Denver this morning." Sophie looked up at Adam, tears streaming down her face. "We did it. We actually did it." "You did it," Adam corrected gently. "I just helped." As the marshals led Cornelius and his men away in shackles, Sheriff Martinez approached Sophie with obvious respect. "Miss Hartwell, the territorial governor, wants to thank you personally for your courage. And he's asked me to tell you that your father's assets are being seized to compensate the families he wronged. What about the railroad's plans?" "Asked. Dead in the water," Marshal Thompson replied from the doorway. "Continental Railroad is facing federal charges of their own. Those families get to keep their land." As the officials departed, Pastor Henley tactfully withdrew to his study, leaving Adam and Sophie alone in the morning light streaming through the windows. "So," Sophie said softly, "what happens now?" Adam looked at this remarkable womanhood, trusted him with her life, fought beside him for justice, and somehow along the way stolen his heart completely. "Now," he said, reaching for her hands, "we figure out what comes next. Together," Sophie began, but he pressed on. "I know I'm just a stable boy, and you're a judge's daughter, former judge's daughter." Sophie corrected, with a small smile. "And you're not just anything, remember?" He smiled back, feeling hope bloom in his chest like spring flowers. "Then maybe we have a chance." "More than a chance," Sophie whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "We have a future." 6 months later, Sophie stood at the window of the small house that Adam had built, with his own hands on the land they'd purchased together near Willow Creek. The morning sun painted the valley in shades of gold, and she could see Adam in the corral, gentling a young Mustang with the same patient skill he'd used to win her heart. The territorial governor had been true to his word. Sophie's testimony had not only sent her father and Cornelius to federal prison, but it also resulted in a substantial reward for exposing the corruption. Combined with Adam's savings and his growing reputation as the finest horse trainer in 3 counties, they'd been able to build a life together that neither had dared dream possible. "Mrs. Caldwell," called a familiar voice from the porch. Sophie smiled at the sound of her married name as she opened the door to find Widow McKenna holding a basket of fresh bread. The older woman had become like a mother to both Sophie and Adam, her gratitude for saving her farm expressing itself in endless acts of kindness. "How are the newlyweds settling in?" Mrs. McKenna asked with a twinkle in her eyes. "Wonderfully," Sophie replied, accepting the bread with genuine warmth. "Adam says the Mustang will be ready for riding by next week." "That husband of yours has magic in his hands with horses," Mrs. McKenna observed. "Speaking of which, Pastor Henley asked me to remind you both about the church social this Saturday. Half the county wants to meet the woman who brought down Judge Hartwell." Sophie's expression grew thoughtful. Attention still felt strange sometimes. She was no longer the isolated judge's daughter, but part of a community that had embraced her with open arms once they learned the truth of her imprisonment and courage. "We'll be there," she promised, after Mrs. McKenna left. Sophie walked out to the corral, where Adam was working with the Mustang. The horse, a beautiful paint mare with intelligent eyes, had been wild just weeks ago. Now she stood calmly as Adam ran gentle hands over her neck and shoulders. "She's beautiful," Sophie said, admiring both the horse and the man who'd tamed her. Adam looked up with the smile that still made her heart skip. Not as beautiful as you. Sophie laughed. It's flatterer. How's she coming along? Someone else I know, Adam replied, stepping out of the corral to wrap his arms around his wife. Speaking of learning, I got a letter from Sheriff Martinez today. Oh, the territorial governor wants to offer you a position as a federal investigator. Seems there are more corrupt officials who need exposing, and they could use someone with your particular talents. Sophie considered this, leaning into Adam's warmth. The work would be dangerous, but important. And after months of peaceful domestic life, she found herself missing the thrill of fighting for justice. What do you think? She asked. I think Adam said carefully that I fell in love with a woman who risks everything to do what's right. I'd be a fool to try to change that now. It would mean traveling, weeks away from home sometimes. Adam's arms tightened around her. Then I guess it's lucky I'm good with horses. Investigators need transportation, don't they? Sophie turned in, his arms studying his face. You'd come with me? Sophie Caldwell? Adam said seriously. I didn't risk everything to save you just to lose you to a job. Wherever you go, I go. We're partners now, remember? Her answer was a kiss that tasted like promises and adventure, like the life they'd built together against all odds. When they broke apart, Sophie could see their future stretching ahead, not the quiet, confined life she'd once expected as a judge's daughter, but something wild and free and full of purpose. Partners, she agreed softly. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Sophie reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. If Cornelius hadn't locked her in that stable, if Adam hadn't heard her crying, if they hadn't found the courage to fight, ... double quotes, what are you thinking about? Adam asked, his hand finding hers in the gathering darkness. Double quotes, just ... How different everything could have been, Sophie replied. If you hadn't been brave enough to risk everything for a stranger. Not a stranger, Adam corrected, bringing her hand to his lips. From the moment I heard you crying in that stall, you were never a stranger. To me, I think I was already half in love with your courage before I ever saw your face. Sophie leaned against his shoulder, contentment settling around her like a warm blanket. Tomorrow they'd write to the territorial governor, accepting the position that would launch them on new adventures. But tonight was enough to sit with the man who'd shown her that sometimes the greatest risks led to the greatest rewards. In the distance, thunder whinnied softly in his pasture, and the paint mare answered from the corral. The sound carried on the evening breeze like a promise that some bonds once forged in courage and sealed with love could never be broken. I love you, Adam Caldwell, Sophie whispered into the starlit darkness. And I love you, Sophie Caldwell, he replied, his voice warm with certainty, forever and always. As if in blessing, a shooting star streaked across the wide Montana sky, carrying their promises into whatever adventures lay ahead.